Entrepreneurs shouldn't be managing their own inbox ever. They shouldn't be managing their own calendar ever. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it spends its whole life thinking it's stupid. Go find the two things that they're a miracle at and build the role around that. AI will never be top down. AI will always be bottom up. It'll be the guy or the gal pushing the broom that realizes like, "Oh, you know what? This AI tool in this way can do this thing with this one particular task."
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast, where you can escape the corporate trap through franchise ownership. Here's your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, the Franchise Guide.
Welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Giuseppe Grammatico. We are continuing part 2 with Kasim Aslam. We're going to be talking about VAs and Pareto Talent. Kasim, welcome back to the show. I appreciate it.
Giuseppe, thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, I wanted to continue the conversation. So for anyone that missed part 1, we dove into marketing, how simple your marketing strategy can be, really stressing YouTube and a few other factors. I won't spoil that. So definitely take a listen to that episode. But wanted to dive in today to talk about Pareto Talent, talk about the VA strategy, when it is the right time to hire a VA. And I wanted you to take it from there.
Yeah, when I sold a business in October of 2022, it was like the crown jewel of my entrepreneurial career. I built the number 1 ranked Google Ads agency in the world. And what's interesting about marketing agencies is they're very margin thin. They're labor businesses. So the HubSpot has more information on agencies, I think, than anybody else in the world, or at least more information that they publicize. And the HubSpot benchmark for agencies is 15% net profit is the high water mark.
Hmm.
So the average agency is aiming to get it 15%. I sold at 40%, and I'd been at 40% for 2 years. And the number 1 question I got all throughout due diligence, because due diligence and an exit is forever, and it's horrible. It's just painful, nonstop proctology exam by somebody without very gentle
Want to
hands.
know everything.
Yeah, really.
I've sold businesses. It's not fun.
It's almost not worth the money, almost. The number 1 question I got throughout all due diligence was, "Where do you find these people?" Because my team was epic.
Right.
Still is. Best people in the whole wide world. It was an amazing agency, but it was my margins were a byproduct of the fact that I was finding Pareto Talent, and I was willing to go international. So, quick thesis for you. First one is, if you're what I'll term as domestic, if you're here in the United States, which where you and I are right now, you don't have access to top-tier talent. God forgive me for saying. Why? Because Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, the Fortune 1000 are eating all the smartest
Mm.
guys and gals right out of school, right? Even if you could compete from a salary perspective, you can't compete with the cachet or ascension opportunity. You don't have a great big high rise with $12 croissants in the conference room. It's just not it's not cool. Or it's too easy to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
And when I shouldn't even say too easy. God bless this country, man. Holy, are you kidding me? Like, it's amazing. And I know in so many ways, that's your audience, right? Like, you help corporate executives become franchise owners. So corporate executives know the game. They know what we're competing against when it comes to talent acquisition. So I don't want to say that we're left with the dregs, but we are left with the leftovers, and they're left over for a reason. Maybe they're working on their own passion project. You're a layover for them. Dude, here's the other thing. I got a brother like this. He's one of the best people I've ever known in my life. Work is not his priority.
Mm.
Dude he was working at GoDaddy, been there for 15 years and loved his job, but
Mhm.
loved his kids more, loved life more, loved to have fun. He doesn't think the way that us entrepreneurs think,
Right.
like it's not his key. Here's what's really funny, and I'd be saying this if you ever heard this interview. I'd never hire him. Like he's not who we want. He's not Pareto Talent. So
I'll
the
make sure to
Pareto
share with them. All good.
Yeah, I'll go send him a link. The Pareto
Mm.
distribution is a mathematical principle that people call the 80/20 rule.
Mhm.
And it says that 20% of the input produces 80% of the output. And everybody knows the 80/20 rule. And so the problem is it's actually almost become white noise. But if you understand the Pareto distribution, it's probably the most important mathematical principle in business and maybe in life. And it's true in every organic ecosystem in weird ways, dude. Like 20% of the cows produce 80% of the milk, and 20% of the stars produce 80% of the light, and 20% of the criminals commit 80% of the crime. Like weird, weird, weird. But 20% of your revenue or 20% of your clients yield 80% of your revenue. 20% of employees do 80% of the work.
Mm.
And this is the most important part, that number is fractal. Fractal meaning it's true at every level of analysis. So if, let's say, just to use round numbers because round numbers make things easier,
Mm.
let's say that there's a business with 1,000 employees. And I know that's a pretty big, small business, but it's still a small business. If you have a business with 1,000 employees, the Pareto distribution would say that 200 of those employees are doing 80% of the work. So 200 of those 1,000 employees are responsible for 80% of the output. And you think like, oh, wow, that's unweighted, but that's interesting. But zoom in on those 200. Of those 200, 40 are doing 80% of that work, which amounts to
Oh, yeah.
64% of the total. Of those 40, 8 are doing 80% of that work, which amounts to 51.2% of the total. Of those 8, 1.6 are doing 40.69% of the total. Now, we can't have fractional people, right? So one person is responsible for 25% of the output, which is insane.
It
It's
is.
insane. And it's been true in every business environment I've ever been in. When I sold my business, we had almost 100 employees. One guy was responsible for 40% of my revenue. His name was John Moran. He's the greatest Google Ads mind in the world. He now bills at $2,500 an hour if you can get him.
Mm.
Most businesses try to flatten the hierarchical structure that is the Pareto distribution. Most businesses, because you get some Ivy League Goldman Sachs douchebag to look at an Excel file, and all they see is an existential risk. They're like, oh, this is outweighted risk. We can't have this. Distribute, the clients or the output or whatever. In a weird, idiosyncratic way, they're actually trying to produce average output. That's what they want. But you don't get to produce average output by lifting the bottom up. The only way you
Right.
can produce average output is by flattening the top down. So they're inhibiting Pareto talent from being able to perform. And when you're willing to start building the base of your pyramid with what other people have on the top, you get what I got, which is EBITDA that's 3x other people's, margins that were 3x other people's. And what's crazy is Pareto talent is unbelievably accessible, freaking everywhere. The point that's really interesting is you have to change the way that you think about humans. And this is going to get real preachy, Giuseppe. So what I might do is I want to talk about the paradigm that you would need in order to hire Pareto, but I'm going to pause here and see if I've catalyzed any questions, comments, concerns, confessions.
I would say that answer a lot. I was going to ask a follow-up. Where do you start or what percentages? So for a small man operation, a solopreneur, 5 employees or less, you start with that strategy and add in full-time staff. Like, what does that look like?
With an EA. That's my very, 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 very strong opinion.
Okay.
The EA is the most important role you'll ever have as an entrepreneur. And an EA is an executive assistant, not virtual assistant. I don't like VA because VA means bullshit work. It's like data entry and cold calling. EA is somebody who, on a long enough timeline, is kind of cloning you. What's cool about the EA role is it's actually an incubator for talent. You never know what the EA is going to be, but you know they're going to be something massively important. My first EA became my director of social. My second EA became my director of automations. My third EA became my CTO, managed my entire exit, and is now one of my best friends. Your EA role is the opportunity for you to bring in somebody massively intelligent, assign them a bunch of random tasks, and start to see what they're really, really, really good at. And I think every entrepreneur needs an EA because entrepreneurs are doing stuff that they should not be doing. They're committing themselves to tasks that are massively beneath their pay grade. So
Mhm.
entrepreneurs shouldn't be
Mm.
managing their own inbox ever. They shouldn't be managing their own calendar ever. They shouldn't be doing, there's 4 columns of work, right? There's $5 an hour work, which is bullshit grunt work that should be automated or eliminated. But there's $50 an hour work, which is trainable work, but should be absolutely delegated. There's $500 an hour work, which is where most people live. And there's $5,000 an hour work, which I call neo work. This is Picasso, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Oprah, whoever. Your goal in life should be to figure out what your 4th column is, your $5,000 an hour work. Most people never get there. I haven't. I think it's something around people, but I haven't really cracked the code on
Mhm.
it. The 3rd column, the $500 work, is where you should at least live the majority of the time, either column 3 or column 4. Columns 1 and 2, you should delegate 100% of the time, and if you don't have somebody to delegate to, then you're stuck. You are
Right.
frozen. And sadly, 60 to 70% of your time is spent in columns 1 and 2, and people don't even realize it, which is insane. So when you start to offload this work onto an EA, the EA is making you, again, speaking in exponential terms, exponentially more functional,
Mhm.
more, what would you say? Your output begins to increase massively. And what a lot of entrepreneurs do incorrectly is they're like, well, gosh, I could do that. I could do that job in 15 minutes. It's taken them 3 hours. Well, let's do the arithmetic there.
Right.
Arithmetic. Your time is worth at least $500 an hour if you're an entrepreneur, at least. especially if you think about what a business is worth at scale when you exit. Business is worth multiples. If you don't think your time is worth $500 an hour, you're not thinking about business properly, your role properly. Your business is worth your time is worth $500 an hour. So if you truly can do something in 15 minutes, let's say that's a $125 task. A good EA is going to cost you 20 bucks an hour. Takes them 4 hours to do your 15-minute task.
Still
That's
ahead.
80 to your 125.
Right.
You're still winning. You're still winning. So what's cool about EAs, here's what everybody does wrong, is they bring in an EA, they assign them 10 things. The EA is going to suck at 2 things horribly. They're going to do 6 things passably well, and they're going to be miracles at 2. And the whole entrepreneurial world focuses on the 2 things they suck at. And they're like, "All right, we're gonna get you there, kid. We'll build a performance improvement program, and we're gonna coach you and take training." And it's like, stop doing that. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it spends its whole life thinking it's stupid. Go find the 2 things that they're a miracle at and build the role around that. You should never have an EA for long. You should never have an EA for longer than 2 years because they ascend into other roles in your organization.
Mm.
As long as you're finding the right people, and that's the real key. That's the thing I've cracked the code on. I can tell you exactly how to do it. I've got a step-by-step framework. I'm actually writing a book right now called Hire that I'm gonna give away for free. Your audience can have it for free. As soon as it's done, it should be done by the end of this month. I'll be publishing it to my newsletter. But I want everybody in the world to see how accessible high quality talent is internationally. If I make one impact in my life, I want to help people in emerging nations see more opportunity. Because that's the issue. Everybody's like, oh, I've outsourced before and it went poorly. But then I dig into it. I'm like, really, what did you outsource? They're like, well, I hired some kid in India for $3 an hour to make 500 cold calls a day. You know, and I'm like, how long would you last at that job, jackass? Like, in what world could a human possibly be functional long
You're
enough to
setting
run
them
a
up for failure. Yeah.
you
It's
know what I
yeah.
mean? Yeah, that's exactly right. So the first thing is Pareto Talent, they're peak performers. They're winners. Winners want to win. How do we win? How do we keep score in life? Money. So here's the first thing. Every business book in the history of the world, somebody challenged me on this. Every business book in the history of the world treats people, talks about people, and trains us to treat people like commodities. All of them. And what do you do with the commodity? You try to get the most for the least, which is what we should do with a commodity. The problem is people are not commodities. Commodities are easily interchangeable. They're fungible, right? If you have an ear of corn and I have an ear of corn and we trade, you're no better or worse off than you were 60 seconds ago. You can't say that for any 2 people. If you have an employee and you've got a Jerry and I've got a Sally and we trade, the differences are incalculable beyond measure. People
Great.
are miracles. They're amazing. Everything amazing that's ever been accomplished, ever will be accomplished, has been accomplished by a human or something that a human's built. And we have the ability to take those people and put them in organizations, but the minute you treat them like cogs in a machine, you lose everything that's amazing about the human being. You become Quicken Loans. There's nothing special about Quicken Loans. It's garbage. It's going to be replaced by AI. So if you want, and dude, I don't care. Same person with this from this, or the same type of person from the same geographic region, at the same school, born on the same day, with the same education, that worked at the same job, the same role for the same amount of time. You have 2 people like that. They're still massively different.
Right.
Massively different. And so the point behind hiring, you're gonna find what you look for. If you're looking for a cog in the machine, that's what you're gonna find. If you're looking for somebody who's manageable, you're gonna find someone who needs to be managed. Look for a miracle. People are miracles. They're unbelievable miracles. And if you actually let them show you, being an entrepreneur sucks. It's horrible. You know what it's like? It's like you got this sled that you're pulling up this muddy hill in the rain. And every time you stop walking, you start sliding back down. And the sled's heavy and you've got these straps over your shoulders and they're cutting in and you're bleeding and you're tired and you're alone and it's cold. And then you hire somebody and you throw them onto the sled and they just make it heavier and harder because you have to tell them what to do and how to do it and watch them do it. And half the time it's just easier if you do it yourself anyway. Imagine hiring somebody that actually grabs a strap, plugs it into the sled, and starts pulling with you. Imagine when they pull faster and harder than you do. Imagine when you get to stop pulling. That's what happens when you hire Pareto Talent, and they are freaking everywhere. You have to pay more than anybody's willing to pay. And as soon as I say that, people instantly get repelled. They're like, oh, nope, I'm out. There's nothing more expensive than a cheap employee. That's what's insane. That's what's unbelievable. When you try to get more person for less, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. To get Pareto Talent, you need to pay 10% more than the high watermark. So if the high watermark is, I don't know what, 50 grand a year, pay 55. Now, that's what I just said is a little misleading because if the high watermark is 50 grand a year, chances are you're paying 40, right? But when you pay 10% more than the high watermark, you don't get 10% more output. You get 20, 50, a
Right.
100 times the output. You get these people that are literal miracles. So you pay more than anybody's willing to pay. You let them work on a flexible schedule. You don't screenshot their desktop or make them track their keystrokes or any of that Gestapo horse. You make them feel like they're important. You give them purpose and show them the purpose in their organization. That doesn't mean that the role needs to be brain surgery. At Solutions 8, we had a whole team of people. There were 3 or 4 people that did nothing but listen to phone calls and score phone calls all day. Horrible job. But they were treated really well. We let them work on a flexible schedule, and I told them on a recurring basis how important what they were doing was. And I showed them, if you don't score these phone calls, we can't optimize these campaigns.
Right.
And if we can't optimize these campaigns, then sometimes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars is at risk.
Transparency. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's
So if you can teach people and show people how important they are, treat them like they're important, you get people that treat the job like it's important. Every other agency, that role would have been churn and burn. People would have lasted 90 days. I had people on my call rating team for years, for years. So go international, because when you go international, working for a US company when you're in Latin America or North Africa or East Asia or, East Europe, is like working for a Fortune 1000 for one of us. We're aspirational for them. Pay them more than they'd ever be able to make domestically, and you're gonna find people that are hardworking and industrious,
Mhm.
and then treat them like they're real life human beings. And dude, oh my god. Like, the impact you get to make on other people's life, not to soapbox, but it's true. Like, imagine that's the other thing too, is we're spoiled here. We don't realize what infrastructures are like. You wanna see an infrastructure problem, go to Venezuela. Power's always going out,
Yeah.
internet's always going out. There is a there's a disconnect that we have between what we experience and what real life really looks like. So to give somebody the ability to work from home in an international market where they don't have to like
Teach.
survive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Transit over there, traffic over there, like it's just a whole different world. It's a whole different thing. Imagine a world where mom and dad are home and kids get to be with mom and dad have more money than the peers. And so they can actually invest in good clean food, good clean water, vacation time, like it's crazy. That's the other thing that's really interesting is I'm not soapboxing. It's better economically for you. You get better employees and better output when they're not worried about money. So we go out and we love on these folks. I love Latin America right now for a bunch of reasons. English proficiency super high, especially depending on the country you go to. Argentina and Colombia, great English proficiency, high college graduate rates. They're technically proficient. And this will get real racist real quick, but the Asian accent is repellent to the Western ear, not because people are racist, but because of call centers. So my dad has a thick Pakistani accent, right? If I put my dad on the phone with my conservative client, even if the conservative client doesn't even realize it, there's just this note of like, "Oh god, you sound like every call center person I've ever been on the phone with," and I have a negative nerve association with that. The Latin accent is your neighbor. They're on our time zone. They're a Christian country, generally speaking, depending on where you are. So what does that mean? Why is that relevant? Well, their holidays are aligned with us. When I sold my business, I had 30 Indians working for me. The Indians have all the holidays and they're diametrically opposed to ours. So when I'm working, they're not. When they're working, I'm not. So I'm
That's a
not
good
telling you
point.
have to go to Latin
Cultures. Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
but it's really ripe. There's strong potential in Latin America. And all Latin Americans are on LinkedIn. So you can go straight to LinkedIn to find them. And I've got a whole hiring framework that'll show you how to list, how to post, how to filter. Because here's the thing is if you're paying as much as I tell you to pay and you're offering people real meaningful work, you're going to get inundated by applicants. So the key is to filter strongly.
Right.
And I have all these little fly traps in my hiring. That's how I do it. My job is to not do interviews. Make people follow certain very specific instructions. And if they can't follow the instructions, they get filtered right out. And I end up with killers, man. Like some of the people, they're just bloodthirsty assassins. They're just more potent. They're nuclear weapons. Everybody else is building their armies with just sycophants and yes men, and I'm building them. They've got sloths and ants, and I've got lions, tigers, and bears. They can't compete with me.
When you're looking for individuals, just say in Latin America, so not only are you finding them, what are you training them on initially?
Yeah, so we train and staff for EAs only. That's the only role that I'll staff
That's what I
for.
see.
I
Okay.
might expand that someday. We've done some custom staffing for people, like found them custom roles. We did 2 software developers. We did a digital marketer recently. But I like the EA role because it's so ascendable. So right now, the only thing I'm training and staffing is executive assistants. We have a wait list at the moment, but we've got a cohort of about 50 A's that are going to graduate. So I should have some inventory. If anybody wants an EA, go to paretotalent.com. We'll see if we're a fit for each other. The EA role is trained on things like it's the usual suspects, obviously. So research, inbox management, calendar management, communication, project management, obviously. And then some of the things that you might not think about, but are still critically important: automation, integration, using Zapier, using Go High Level, AI. Here's the thing about AI. and this is I am a petulant child when it comes to this, and I'll fight to the death with anybody that disagrees with me. AI, unless you are specifically an AI company, AI will never be top down. You'll never, ever, ever buy a franchise and come in as the new franchise owner with your 6 locations and say, "Here are all the ways that we're gonna use AI."
Mm.
AI will never be top down. AI will always be bottom up. It'll be the guy or the gal pushing the broom that realizes like, "Oh, you know what? This AI tool in this way can do this thing with this one particular task." Bottom up, grassroots.
Right.
So what you'd want is you'd want the people that are actually doing the work to have some AI enablement. And we don't focus on this too much because it's so transient and changes too much. Usurpation is just it's built into the system. So I don't want my EAs to necessarily know AI tools as much as I want them to know AI thinking. So
Mm.
they're all trained on ChatGPT and Midjourney and Bolt now, which is super cool if you haven't played with it. But what I want is I want the EA to come into your organization and start to look, and then you can say, "Do this task, do this thing, call this person, research this, whatever," and then they can start to be like, and help you permeate and
Right.
penetrate on a granular level. Training the EAs, they go through a boot camp at Pareto Talent, but we only hire 1%. I actually have the numbers somewhere, I can pull them up, but, like, we've done 3 boot camps so far. We had 3,000 applicants, only 300 of them were accepted to the boot camp, and of the 300, we only accepted 50
Yeah.
to actually place at Pareto. So we're capturing the top of the top of the top. And it's been so rewarding, man. Like, we're now getting clients that are hiring their 2nd and their 3rd, which is pretty cool. And I've got some badasses like Tim Bratton. He's the founder of Rhapsody. He has one of my EAs. He's, building some really amazing things. And the EA is not an assistant. It's like a partner at this point. The
Right.
guy that he hired he works with him literally every single day. We've got EAs placed with a Teal fellow, one of the larger agency owners in the world. I'm about to have an EA placed with, a buddy whose name I'll drop as soon as I actually get him to sign on the dotted line, but he's a great big deal that everybody would know. Not to name drop, I don't mean to do that, but just to say, like, they've been vetted, you know? And to be frank, you don't need to hire through me. That's the other thing. I just make it easier. I make it a little easier, a little faster, but I'm also expensive.
Right.
You're probably gonna pay, I don't know what, 40% more if you go through me. If you're listening to this and you don't wanna go pay through the nose, go hire yourself. You can do it yourself,
Well,
you
you
know?
wrote the book, right? I
Dude,
mean,
Latin
if
America's a
you
big
want.
place. You know what I mean? Yeah, and this is what I'm getting at is not everybody's gonna be right fit for me
Right.
anyway. We've got a pretty specific avatar. I really want clients that are gonna be able to scale, and I'd like to find clients who want multiple resources. But going back to what we talked about in the first interview, here I am giving it away for free, and if you wanna do it yourself, God bless. Worst thing that happens is a bunch of Latin Americans get opportunities they didn't have exposure to otherwise. And if you'd like to hire me, I'd love to work with you. So I'm not batting anybody away,
You gotta
but
make sure it's a good fit, and we're gonna put everything in the show notes. You wanna make sure it's a good fit, plus you had mentioned there's a waiting list. But yeah, I mean, I think the issue is people don't know where to start. So, like the book Who Not How by Dan Sullivan, it's like, all right, who are the people that have done it before and will, make things a lot faster, simpler? Who's gonna the book is great, but how many people actually finish a book? I think Amazon says people from their Kindle research don't pass the first, I think it's the first chapter.
I know,
Either it was
yeah, that
10% of the first chapter, so they buy the book and they're like, "All right, how do I find someone to help me implement all these marketing strategies or find my EA?" So I hear that all the time. People download my book. Great book. Did you read it? I didn't pass the first chapter. I read the first couple pages. Tell me what it's about. So I hear it all the time. But yeah, no, this is awesome. I'm actually it's been on my list to review your site as well. And 'cause we've been thinking about that, where how to take the business to the next level. So we'll definitely continue that conversation. Any last bits of advice for anyone listening in for these either existing or soon to be entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, this isn't pandering, dude. I really believe this. I think the franchise model is probably the smartest model to pursue in the coming years. I'm seeing, especially with AI and automation, I'm seeing industries die by the dozens. It's crazy. In they're all the darlings. So SaaS dying, e-com dying, agency, my world dying. And the businesses that really seem to be performing, and I only know this because I have so much visibility into so many businesses and what they spend. They're geo-located, geo-specific. They're providing a real product or service, and they have the ability to over-deliver, which to me, I just define the franchise model. Not trying to juice you too much, dude, but I think you're right smack dab in the middle of where people need to be. And I think here's the other thing. there's gonna be an onslaught of white collar job loss in the next 3 to 5 years. Like, it's gonna get real messy real quick. So if you wanna go get out ahead of that, you don't wanna, I mean, we're talking roving bands of it's gonna be like a Steinbeck novel. Just guys and gals trying to figure out what the hell they're doing next. And I'm really optimistic about the future, truly. I actually think AI solves all the world's problems in 100 years. But in 30 years, we're gonna have to figure out what to do with everybody. We're probably looking at universal basic income without question in the next decade or so. And people are gonna have to figure out what the hell to do. And I think going back local, going brick and mortar, focusing on what does not scale. I hate the word scale. Anybody who tries to teach scale should be shot in the face. It's what scales is by definition not profitable. If it scales, it's commoditized. If it's, you're asking for a business model that is there's forced obsolescence built into the model. It's so freaking stupid. It blows my mind. Go find the things that don't scale. Find the business opportunity because that's what people will pay you to do, that which doesn't scale. So if you're listening, I'm rooting for you truly, dearly, deeply. Appreciate the time and the opportunity. I'm trying to be on podcasts. So if anybody has a podcast they want me on, reach out.
Yeah, we'll
Thanks
get
for
you
having me on, buddy. I
all your
appreciate it.
information. Yeah, we'll get all your information on there so they can reach out to you directly. It's been awesome. I appreciate it. It's been a while. We finally got this recorded, and yeah, would love to have you back on in the very near future. Learn about the all these other businesses you're launching. So keep us posted, and we'll include all those links to the new book and the new business and the blog that we put together.
Sounds good.
Thanks
Appreciate the
again,
time.
man. Take
All
care.
right, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn how to make the transition from corporate to owning your franchise, join Giuseppe on the next episode. You can also follow on all social media platforms and achieve financial and time freedom today.